She wasn't meant to touch the controls. That much was clear from the moment she stepped on board. She was just another passenger, someone sitting quietly in her seat, trying to relax before the long flight ahead. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel and fresh coffee, and the hum of the engines reminded her that she was far from the safety of the ground. She had always admired pilots, the way they walked with calm confidence, the way they spoke in steady voices, and the way people trusted them with their lives. But never once did she imagine that she would have to think about what it meant to actually sit in that seat, to touch those switches and buttons. That was a world meant for someone else. The cabin was filled with the usual mix of travelers, some already dozing, some chatting, some staring at the tiny screens in front of them. Flight attendants walked up and down the aisle, smiling, serving water, reminding people to fasten their seatbelts. It was routine, it was ordinary, just another flight in the endless stream of air travel. But for her, this journey carried a strange weight. She had been nervous when boarding, not because of flying itself, but because she couldn't shake the thought that something unusual was going to happen. She brushed it off as overthinking, reminding herself that airplanes were the safest way to travel. Still, a part of her heart beat faster than it should, as if warning her of something she couldn't yet see. As the aircraft climbed higher, clouds floated below like white mountains. The passengers around her settled into their own worlds. Headphones on, books open, eyes closed. She tried to follow, tried to relax, but her gaze kept drifting toward the front of the cabin, toward the locked door behind which the pilots worked. It felt distant and untouchable, yet something about it pulled her attention. She told herself stories in her mind, stories of how pilots handled storms, of how they stayed awake during long nights, of how much responsibility weighed on their shoulders. These thoughts kept her entertained until a sudden flicker of turbulence shook the cabin. People gasped, cups rattled. A child cried out, the plane steadied again. But the moment left a shiver running through her. The voice of the pilot soon came through the speaker, calm and reassuring, telling them it was just a pocket of rough air. His tone carried authority, the kind that could quiet fears. She listened carefully, studying the sound of someone who seemed unshaken, even when everyone else held their breath. And she thought again about how different that role was from hers. Just a quiet passenger who could only wait and hope. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time on an airplane always felt strange, stretched and bent by clouds and sky. She leaned back and closed her eyes for a while. But something inside kept her restless. She could not have known that the silence of routine was about to be broken. It began quietly, the sound of the engines stayed steady. The flight attendants still moved gracefully, but a faint stir spread among the crew. She noticed one attendant hurry toward the cockpit door, whispering something to another. Their smiles looked thinner now, more forced, like masks trying not to slip. At first she thought it was nothing, maybe just a technical detail, maybe a message from the ground. But when she saw the door open slightly and a worried face glance out, her heart tightened. Something was wrong. Not with the passengers, not with the plane, but with the person who was supposed to guide them. The next moment changed everything. A flight attendant stepped forward, her voice trembling just slightly as she spoke to the nearest row. "Please remain calm," she said. "The captain is not feeling well." The words echoed in her ears, heavier than the roar of the engines. The captain, the one person they all relied on, was no longer in full control. A hush fell over the cabin, followed by a ripple of nervous whispers. Some passengers gasped. Others shook their heads in disbelief. She sat frozen, her hands gripping the armrest, her thoughts racing faster than she could hold them. The door opened wider, and for the first time, she saw inside the cockpit. She caught a glimpse of flashing screens, glowing buttons, and the wide windshield framing the endless sky. And in the middle of it, slumped in his seat, was the pilot, his head tilted, his hand slipping from the controls. A second pilot rushed forward, shouting for help. The attendants tried to stay calm, but the tension broke through in their voices. The scene no longer felt like a routine flight. It felt like something out of a story that no one wanted to live through. Her heart pounded. Her seat felt too small, the air too thin. Her eyes locked on that open cockpit door. She could see the fear in the crew's eyes. She could feel the panic building in the cabin. And deep inside she knew that the moment she had feared, the moment she couldn't explain, was here. She was never meant to touch the controls, never meant to play any role beyond sitting quietly in row 17. But as the pilot collapsed and the world seemed to tilt, A single thought echoed in her chest. What if she was the only one who could step forward? The cabin felt smaller now, as if the walls were pressing in. The air was heavy with tension. Every passenger could sense that something was wrong. Even though no one wanted to admit it aloud, the flight attendants moved quickly, trying to keep order. But their voices carried worry no matter how hard they tried to mask it. Inside the cockpit, the second pilot fought to keep control. His voice came out sharp over the radio, his hands steady but strained. The slumped body of the captain beside him was a silent weight, a reminder that their safety now rested on only one pair of hands. She sat frozen, but her mind refused to stay still. She wasn't a pilot, she wasn't trained. But life had strange ways of shaping people. She had spent years watching, learning, absorbing details from documentaries, articles, and her own fascination with aviation. She never thought that knowledge would matter. Until now, her eyes followed every move of the attendants. Every whisper between them, she overheard fragments. Words like medical emergency, oxygen, unresponsive. None of it made her feel calmer. The plane seemed to glide smoothly, but beneath that calm surface was chaos waiting to rise. The passengers around her began murmuring. Some asked questions, others pressed their call buttons. A man across the aisle tried to stand, demanding answers. The attendants guided him gently back to his seat, their own eyes betraying fear. She could feel the shift. The fragile trust between passengers and crew shaking. And then came the question that no one wanted to face. What if the second pilot couldn't handle it alone? What if the situation grew worse? It wasn't only about flying. It was about guiding a machine carrying hundreds of lives across the sky. Her heart beat faster. She wanted to look away, to bury herself in her seat and pretend she was like everyone else. But she couldn't because deep inside she carried something others didn't. She carried hours of silent practice on flight simulators she had used in secret. She carried knowledge about instruments, runways, and radio calls. She carried an understanding of the cockpit that no ordinary passenger should have. It had been a passion, a hidden love, one that she never shared because she feared people would laugh. "You're not a pilot," they would have said. "You'll never be in that seat," and yet here she was, staring at the very door that kept her from the controls. The flight attendants whispered urgently among themselves. One of them grabbed the microphone and spoke in a voice that trembled only slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for your cooperation," she said. "If there is a doctor on board, please make yourself known immediately." Several heads turned, and two people raised their hands. They hurried forward to the cockpit, carrying small medical bags from their luggage. The sight gave hope, but only for a moment. If the captain remained unconscious, if his condition didn't improve, the burden on the co-pilot would only grow heavier. The minutes felt like hours. The hum of the engines was the only steady sound. The passengers whispered, some prayed quietly. Some clutched each other's hands. She closed her eyes briefly, breathing deeply. Her thoughts repeated one line again and again. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not like this, but maybe fate had different plans. The co-pilot's voice came through the cabin speakers. It was controlled but tired. "We are experiencing a medical emergency with our captain," he said. "I am handling the controls. Please stay calm and follow crew instructions." His words were firm, but she could hear the strain behind them. A man stretched to his limit. She felt her pulse in her ears. Her mind whispered that this was the moment where all her hidden practice and secret knowledge mattered. But how could she step forward? How could she explain to the crew, to the passengers, that she could help? Would they believe her or push her away? The door to the cockpit closed again, but the image of the fallen captain stayed in her eyes. She couldn't erase it. She couldn't forget the helplessness on the crew's faces. The longer she waited, the stronger the thought grew. She wasn't meant to touch the controls, but maybe she was meant to save lives. A sudden bump jolted the aircraft. The wings tilted slightly before correcting. Gasps filled the cabin, fear rippled like a wave. The co-pilot's voice came again, calmer this time. But the truth was clear. He was managing alone, and the sky had ways of testing even the strongest. Her hands gripped the armrests. Her body was frozen, but her soul burned with decision. She could sit back and hope, or she could rise and face the impossible. The thought terrified her, but it also pulled her like gravity. Finally, she unbuckled her seatbelt. The small click sounded louder than the engines in her ears. Passengers turned their heads as she stood. Her steps were slow but steady. Each one carried the weight of fear and courage together. The flight attendants noticed, their eyes narrowing in confusion. "Ma'am, please remain seated," one said firmly. She looked back at them with a calmness she didn't feel inside. Her voice was steady. "I know about planes," she said softly. "You need me." The attendants froze, torn between disbelief and desperation. Behind them, the cockpit door remained closed. Behind that door, the co-pilot struggled and the captain lay unconscious. She stood there, the eyes of the cabin on her, the weight of choice pressing down. She wasn't meant to touch the controls, everyone knew that. But sometimes life didn't follow rules. Sometimes the sky chose its own pilot. And maybe, just maybe, that person was her. The moment she stood in the aisle, the cabin turned quiet. It was not the silence of calm, but the silence of hundreds of eyes staring at one person who dared to move when no one else would. The air felt thicker, as though every breath carried a question. What was she doing? The attendants blocked her path at first, their professional smiles gone, replaced with raw fear. "Please sit down," one said, trying to sound firm, but she didn't move. Her voice came steady, though her heart raced. "I can help," she said. "I know the basics. I understand the controls." The words sounded unreal even to her, but she had spoken them, and once spoken, there was no turning back. A murmur spread across the cabin. Some passengers gasped, some whispered, some shook their heads in disbelief. No one knew who she was, and yet here she was, claiming something that could mean life or death. The flight attendant glanced toward the cockpit door, hesitation in her eyes. Inside that door, the co-pilot fought against pressure, against loneliness, against the limits of one human being. Outside, a stranger offered help. It was a choice between protocol and desperation. Another jolt shook the aircraft, not sharp enough to cause damage, but enough to remind everyone of how fragile their situation was. Cups rattled. A baby cried. The seatbelt signs glowed brighter even though they had never turned off. Fear thickened, and with it came a shift. Suddenly, the idea of letting her try didn't sound so impossible. The intercom clicked again. The co-pilot's voice sounded strained. "Cabin crew, secure the area," he ordered. His words were professional, but she could hear the weight under them. He was alone, carrying more than he should, and perhaps even he knew he couldn't carry it much longer. The attendant's hands trembled as she unlocked the cockpit door slightly. Her eyes searched the woman's face. "Are you sure?" she whispered. The woman nodded, her throat dry. She was terrified, but more terrified of doing nothing. The door opened wider. The cockpit glowed with lights and screens. The smell of metal and electronics filled her senses, and there in the left seat the captain lay slumped, his face pale, his chest barely rising. Two doctors tried to stabilize him, but their expressions gave away the truth. They didn't know if he would recover in time. In the right seat, the co-pilot was sweating, his hands gripping the yoke, his eyes darting across instruments. He didn't look up at first, too focused on keeping the plane steady. But when he did, his gaze met hers, confusion mixed with desperation. "I can help," she said again, softly but firmly. The words seemed to hang in the air. The co-pilot blinked, as if weighing whether she was madness or salvation. "You're a passenger," he said, his voice tired. "You don't belong here." "I've studied," she replied quickly. "I know more than you think, just let me assist. I won't touch anything without you." Her tone wasn't arrogant. It wasn't commanding. It was steady. It was the voice of someone asking not for trust, but for a chance. For a moment, silence filled the small space. Only the beeping of instruments and the roar of engines broke it. Then the co-pilot let out a shaky breath. "Sit there," he muttered, pointing to the jump seat behind him. "If you know anything, prove it by listening." Her knees felt weak, but she nodded. She slid into the small seat, strapping herself in. The view outside took her breath away, the vast blue sky, the curve of the horizon, the endless distance between her and the ground, and yet despite the fear, something inside her steadied. This was where she was meant to be. The co-pilot barked quick instructions, his voice sharp. "Read me the altitude," he said. Pointing at a dial, she leaned forward, scanning quickly. 34,000 feet, she answered. He gave her a quick look, surprised but not displeased. He asked another. "Speed," she responded. 470 knots, again. She was correct. The co-pilot's face softened. Only slightly. "All right," he said. "Maybe you can be useful after all." The doctors in the background worked urgently, their quiet voices layered with medical terms. The captain remained unconscious, his chest rising with shallow breaths. Time was not on their side. If the co-pilot faltered, if exhaustion took him too, there would be no one left. She sat straighter, her nerves buzzing. Every gauge, every switch, every blinking light drew her focus. It was overwhelming, yet strangely familiar. Her mind recalled the hours spent in simulations, the diagrams she studied late into the night. She never thought those moments mattered, but now they did. The co-pilot's voice broke through her thoughts. "You said you've studied. Why?" he asked suddenly. She hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because I always wanted to fly, but I was told it wasn't for me, so I learned in secret. I learned because I couldn't let go." For the first time, he looked at her not as a passenger, but as someone standing on the edge of something greater. He didn't smile, but there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Perhaps he saw a mirror of himself, a person who carried dreams heavier than most understood. Outside, clouds stretched endlessly. The engines hummed like a heartbeat. Inside, a fragile partnership was forming. One built not on trust earned over years, but on necessity. On the thin line between survival and disaster. She wasn't meant to touch the controls, that truth remained, but now, with the captain unconscious and the co-pilot exhausted, she wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a piece of hope, fragile but real. And as she sat in that jump seat, eyes locked on the horizon, she knew that the story of this flight had only begun. The cockpit felt like another world, a place where every second mattered, where silence could mean disaster, and every sound carried weight. The co-pilot's hands moved quickly, scanning screens, adjusting switches. His jaw tight with focus, she sat just behind him, her heart pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it. The doctors worked on the captain, calling out medical terms that blurred together. A mask covered his face now, delivering oxygen, but he didn't stir. His stillness pressed heavily on everyone, a reminder that this flight was not ordinary anymore. The co-pilot leaned forward, speaking into the radio. His voice sounded calm but carried cracks of exhaustion. "Control, this is Flight 279, Captain incapacitated. I am handling alone." A burst of static filled the space before a calm voice replied, guiding him to stay steady, but it was clear. Control on the ground couldn't hold the yoke for him. They were only voices miles away. Another light flickered on the panel. Amber, not red, but still urgent. The co-pilot cursed under his breath. "Hydraulics reading low," he muttered. His hands moved faster, adjusting systems. Sweat beaded his forehead. For the first time, his voice slipped. "This is too much for one person." She leaned forward, her voice low. "Tell me what to do." The words left her before she could take them back. The co-pilot turned, eyes sharp, ready to dismiss her. But then he paused. His gaze fell on her steady hands, on her eyes locked firmly on the instruments. "Not the chaos, fine," he said, voice clipped. "Read me the checklist, page 247. He pointed to a thick binder of procedures strapped beside her seat. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through. Scanning the dense words, she began to read, her voice steady. "Hydraulic pressure low, verify systems A and B." He nodded sharply. "Done," she continued. "Check standby system." His hands flew across the switches. "Engaged," he confirmed. The light dimmed slightly. Not gone, but stable for the first time. The co-pilot exhaled, relief flashing across his face. She hadn't touched a control, but her voice had steadied the flight. The realization hit her hard. She wasn't here to replace him. She was here to hold the cracks together, to be the second set of eyes. The reminder that he wasn't alone outside. The sky darkened as clouds gathered. Thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The plane shuddered again, stronger this time. Passengers gasped from the cabin, their fear vibrating through the walls. The storm had arrived. The co-pilot gripped the yoke tighter. "Turbulence incoming," he muttered. His voice sounded controlled, but the white knuckles on his hands told the truth. The plane dipped, then leveled, dipped again. Every move sent a shiver down her spine. She read the turbulence procedures without waiting for him to ask, her voice cutting through the storm's growl. "Seatbelt sign on, adjust vertical speed. Maintain heading 290. He followed her words instantly, as though her calm reading was another instrument. In the cabin, trays rattled, children cried, voices rose. The attendants tried to calm everyone, but the fear was stronger now. The plane shook like a leaf in the storm had faded behind them, but the weight inside the cockpit did not lift. The co-pilot's face was pale, his eyes red from strain. The constant responsibility of flying alone pressed heavy on him, and though she had helped by reading checklists and guiding his focus, both of them knew the truth, sooner or later. He would need her to do more than speak. The captain still lay motionless, his chest rising faintly under the oxygen mask. The doctors whispered quietly, trying their best. But their worried glances told the story. No quick recovery was coming. No strong voice of command would rise again from that seat. The woman's hands itched against her lap. She wasn't touching anything, not yet, but her mind kept scanning the glowing panels. Every light, every number felt like a language she knew halfway, a language she had never expected to use here, yet one she had practiced in silence for years. The co-pilot caught her watching, his lips pressed into a thin line. He hesitated, then finally said, "You said you've studied, so let's find out. Place your hand on the yoke." Her breath caught, she froze for a second. Looking at the smooth handle before her, it felt unreal, as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff. One step could change everything if she failed. It wasn't just her, it was everyone on this plane. "Do it," the co-pilot said firmly. His voice carried no room for doubt. Slowly, she reached forward. Her fingers brushed the yoke, and a shiver ran through her. It was heavier than she imagined, alive with the force of the sky pressing against the wings. "Just feel it," the co-pilot instructed. "Don't fight it yet. Let the plane speak to you." She nodded, her knuckles white. The yoke trembled slightly in her hands, not from her, but from the wind and the endless air currents outside. It was like holding the heartbeat of a giant. "Good," he said quietly. "Now when I tell you, follow my lead." He guided the yoke gently. She followed. Every small movement shifted the massive aircraft. A tilt, a correction, a steadying motion. The realization struck her hard. This was real, and the lives of everyone on board tilted with her hands. Her heart thundered, yet her breathing slowed. A strange calm began to settle, like stepping into a role she had secretly rehearsed her entire life. The fear was still there, but it sat beside her courage, not over it. The co-pilot gave quick instructions. "Adjust pitch 2 degrees down." She followed, eyes flicking to the instruments. "Hold," he said. She held. The numbers steadied. "Not bad," he admitted. The moment didn't go unnoticed by the doctors. One of them glanced up from the captain, staring at her with wide eyes. The attendants in the doorway watched too, uncertain but hopeful. In the cabin beyond, the passengers had no idea that their fate now rested partly in the hands of someone who wasn't supposed to be here. She swallowed hard, reminding herself this wasn't about proving she could fly. It was about survival, about stepping in when no one else could, and yet, a part of her soul lit up like fire because for the first time, she wasn't just pretending, she was flying. The co-pilot tested her slowly. "Turn heading 310, he said. She moved the yoke gently, watching the compass shift. The aircraft obeyed. He nodded once, his respect growing, though he didn't say it. "Altitude," he ordered. She glanced at the gauge. 33,000 steady, she replied. He allowed himself the faintest smile. It was working. Minutes stretched into something unreal. The cockpit became a world of two. His tired skill and her unexpected courage, every command he gave, she followed. Every correction he made, she absorbed slowly. They began to move in rhythm, but the world didn't wait for them to grow comfortable. A new warning tone filled the cockpit, sharp and shrill. The co-pilot's head snapped toward the panel. His expression tightened. "Fuel imbalance," he muttered. One side of the plane was burning faster than the other. It wasn't critical yet, but if left unchecked, it could turn deadly. He began working the switches, then glanced at her. "Keep her level while I handle this." The words sank into her chest. He was trusting her not just to touch, but to hold. Her grip tightened. Sweat beaded her forehead. Every nerve screamed with fear, but she kept her hand steady. The yoke resisted slightly, but she remembered his words. "Don't fight it. Guide it." She breathed deep and focused on the horizon. The seconds stretched. The co-pilot worked quickly. Balancing the fuel systems, his hands flew over switches, his eyes darting back to the gauges. Meanwhile, she kept the plane level. Every dip corrected, every sway balanced. The shrill warning tone finally silenced. The co-pilot exhaled loudly. Wiping his forehead, he looked at her again. His voice quieter now. "You just held control of a jet at 33,000 feet. Her breath trembled. She hadn't realized until then that her body was shaking. She wanted to laugh, to cry, but instead she only nodded. gripping the yoke like it was a lifeline. The co-pilot straightened his shoulders, fatigue still weighing on him. "All right," he said, more to himself than to her. "Maybe we can actually make it." She wasn't meant to touch the controls, but now she had, and with each passing moment, the line between passenger and pilot blurred. She wasn't just part of the story anymore. She was becoming the story. The cockpit was quieter now, but it was not peace. It was the silence that comes after a storm, the kind that holds its breath before another test arrives. The co-pilot leaned back for only a second, his eyes heavy, his voice rough. He looked at her with a strange mix of disbelief and respect. "You're not supposed to be here," he said softly. "But I'm glad you are." She didn't answer. Her hands were still on the yoke, and the hum of the engines pulsed through her palms. Every second felt fragile, like balancing on the edge of a glass bridge. One mistake and everything could shatter. The captain remained unconscious, his shallow breathing keeping hope faint but alive. The doctors shook their heads quietly, whispering that his condition was unchanged. One of them glanced at her and the co-pilot, and for the first time, didn't question why she was there. They all knew the truth. The plane was flying with two pilots, though one of them had never worn the uniform. The radio crackled with a voice from the ground, calm and distant. "Flight 279, we are aware of your situation. We will prepare emergency landing clearance at the nearest airport." "Stand by for vectors," the co-pilot responded quickly, his voice firm but strained. "Copy. Request medical emergency on arrival. Captain incapacitated. Passenger assisting at controls." There was a pause on the other end. Then the voice returned, steady but with a hint of surprise. "Understood, maintain heading, we will guide you in." Her heart leapt at those words. Passenger assisting at controls, it was official now. Not just a secret between her and him. The world outside the cockpit knew she was there, and that meant there was no turning back. The co-pilot turned to her. "If you're going to stay, you'll need to do more," he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with urgency. "Landing is the hardest part. It takes two. I can't manage it alone." Her throat tightened. She had dreamed of flying, of sitting in the cockpit, but she had never once thought about landing a jet carrying hundreds of souls. The thought made her stomach twist. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "You can," he said firmly. "You've been steady so far. You listen, you follow. That's all we need." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "If you panic, we're done. If you focus, we live." The words struck deep. She nodded slowly, her fear still there, but beneath it, something else stirred. A quiet resolve. Maybe this was her purpose, the reason she had carried this strange knowledge in silence for so long. The ground control began reading instructions. Long strings of numbers, headings, and altitudes. The co-pilot repeated them back, his voice steady. Then he looked at her. "You'll help me fly the descent." Her chest tightened. She swallowed hard and nodded. "Tell me what to do," she said. The co-pilot began guiding her. "Hands steady, don't overcorrect. Watch the horizon line, keep your eyes on the instruments, not just the sky." His words came quick, precise, like a teacher in the middle of a fire. For the first time, she felt the plane responding fully to her. A gentle dip, a rise, a correction, every move mattered. The responsibility pressed into her bones, but with every adjustment, her fear shifted, not vanishing, but reshaping into focus. The cabin behind them wasn't calm. People whispered, prayed, some cried softly. The attendants kept moving, doing their best to hide the truth. But deep down, everyone sensed something extraordinary was unfolding at the front of the plane. The engines roared lower as they began their descent. The nose tilted ever so slightly down. Her grip tightened, sweat dampened her forehead. She repeated the co-pilot's words in her head like a rhythm. "Steady hands, follow the horizon." Suddenly the plane jolted. A sharp drop pulled gasps from the passengers. The co-pilot swore under his breath. "Checking the instruments, crosswind," he muttered. The air outside wasn't calm. It wanted to push them off course. "Hold it steady," he barked. She fought the urge to yank the yoke. Instead, she adjusted gently, breathing deep. The plane wavered, then steadied. Her heart slammed against her ribs, but the horizon line returned to where it belonged. "Good," he said sharply, almost with pride. "That's exactly it." "Don't fight the wind, guide against it." Her chest burned with fear, but also with fire. She had just corrected a jet mid-descent, something she never believed she could do, something most passengers never even The glow of city lights flickered through the clouds. Tiny specks that grew brighter as the aircraft descended. The engines hummed louder. The cabin shook gently, and in the cockpit, the air was thick with unspoken fear. This was it, the moment everything came down to. The co-pilot's hand stayed firm on the yoke, his eyes sharp on the instruments. He gave her a quick glance. "We're in this together now," he said. She nodded, her throat dry. Her palms slick with sweat, yet her grip stayed strong. The voice from ground control guided them step by step. "Flight 279, reduce altitude, turn heading 265. Winds gusting from the west." The words came calm, but even calm words could not hide the danger of strong winds waiting at the runway. The co-pilot adjusted the thrust, then nodded at her. "Ease her down gently. Watch the vertical speed." Her hands trembled but obeyed. She pushed slightly, the nose dipping. Her breath caught as the aircraft responded. Every tiny motion echoed across hundreds of lives behind them. The cabin lights had been dimmed. People sat in silence now. Many prayed, some cried softly. Others clutched hands as if that alone could hold the plane steady. They didn't know who sat in the cockpit beside the co-pilot, but they knew their lives were hanging in fragile balance. The clouds thinned and the runway lights appeared far ahead. Glowing like a path carved through darkness, it looked close. But the truth was cruel. It was still miles away, and every second mattered. "Crosswind strong," the co-pilot muttered, his jaw tight. "Keep her nose steady. Don't let the wind push us off." She adjusted carefully, her arms tense. The yoke resisted, the wind tugging at the wings. The aircraft swayed slightly. Gasps echoed faintly from the cabin. She fought to stay calm, breathing slow. "Good," he said, his voice sharp but calmer now. "Trust the instruments, don't chase the feeling. Trust what you see here." He pointed at the glowing dials. She nodded, focusing on the numbers instead of the dizzying tilt of the horizon. The ground rushed closer. The voice on the radio gave final clearance. "Flight 279, you are clear to land." "Emergency crews are standing by," the co-pilot responded, his voice strong. "Roger, cleared to land." Her chest pounded. Her eyes locked on the lights ahead. Her grip tightened. The co-pilot guided her. Flaps full, landing gear down. She read the checklist quickly, her voice steady despite the panic in her blood. The heavy clunk of the landing gear echoed through the fuselage. The runway loomed larger. The crosswind shoved again. Tilting them, the co-pilot shouted, "Correct it!" She pulled gently against the pressure. Her arms shook, but the aircraft obeyed, leveling out. The co-pilot's voice hardened. "This is it, stay with me." "Pull back slowly when I say." She nodded, her heart hammering. The lights raced closer, faster. The runway stretched wide, waiting to either save them or destroy them. "Now," he barked. Together they pulled back gently. The nose lifted. The wheels screeched as they met the ground. The entire cabin shook violently. A chorus of screams filled the air, then sudden silence. The plane roared forward on the runway, rattling, fighting the wind. The co-pilot slammed the brakes. Engines reversed with a deafening howl. The plane jolted, slowing, until at last it rolled steady. A heavy silence filled the air, broken only by the whir of slowing engines. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the co-pilot leaned back, his chest heaving. He looked at her with eyes that carried both disbelief and gratitude. "We made it," he whispered. In the cabin behind them, passengers erupted. Cheers, sobs, clapping hands. Some cried into each other's shoulders. Others shouted prayers of thanks. The attendants wiped tears from their eyes as they rushed to calm the joyful chaos. The doctors worked quickly to move the unconscious captain. Emergency lights flashed outside. Vehicles racing up the runway. But inside the cockpit, all she could do was sit frozen. Her hands still gripping the yoke, her breath trembling. She looked at the co-pilot, her voice breaking. "I wasn't supposed to touch the controls." He shook his head firmly. "No," he said, his voice steady now. "You were supposed to save us." The words hit her like thunder. She looked out the windshield at the flashing lights and realized the truth. She had crossed the line between dream and reality. She had done what no one thought possible. A passenger had helped land a plane. When the doors opened, the world outside waited. News crews, emergency teams, flashing cameras, but for her none of that mattered. What mattered was that hundreds of people stepped off alive. Families reunited, children carried in arms, lives continued because she dared to rise when she wasn't meant to. She walked out last, her steps slow, her heart still pounding. The night air hit her face, cool and real. The co-pilot walked beside her, exhausted but alive. He didn't say another word, he didn't need to. She wasn't meant to touch the controls. But fate had chosen otherwise, and in that choice, she discovered something larger than fear, larger than doubt. She discovered that sometimes the sky doesn't care about rules. Sometimes it only cares about courage, and that courage had saved them all.